Because of the changes we've made to this planet and its many diverse ecosystems, we are currently experiencing a massive biodiversity loss. This means that many of the beautiful creatures we share the planet with are disappearing, and their habitats are also disappearing. Over the past few decades, 10% of the world's wildness has been lost to human pressure, and this only looks to be getting worse. Luckily for some animals, there is a twist in this story, as countless times captive breeding and conservation has proved that we can bring animals back from the brink of extinction. On the conservation status that most of us use, the listings go from extinct to least concern. Although these listings are not always entirely accurate, in this video I will be focusing on creatures that are extinct in the wild. This is one step away from extinction itself, but there is still hope for these creatures that have almost disappeared. In this video I'll be going through just a few of the species that we almost lost to extinction, as I'll be going through 5 species that can only be found in captivity. And for our first species we'll be heading over to North Africa, as we have the Scimitar Oryx. This species once roamed the semi-deserts of North Africa, mostly in the countries of Niger and Chad, as these areas are mostly harsh and unforgiving. This oryx had a few adaptations to help it survive in these conditions. It was able to survive for months or even years without drinking water, as it got most of its daily moisture from the plants it ate. Because of the harsh sun in the areas in which they were found, they were most active at dusk and dawn, where they could feed without the pressure of the intense heat. Their white coats also help them reflect the heat from the sun, and their broad hooves prevent them from sinking into the sand. These animals usually live in herds of around 20 to 40 individuals, but at one point in time they were even found in groups of over 1,000. In the wild, adults were targeted by leopards and lions, and their young were also targeted by birds of prey and young baboons. This predation wasn't the reason behind their downfall, because of course humans were behind their demise. This species was declared extinct in the wild in 2000, as they were last seen in the wild in the late 1980s. Overhunting was one of the reasons behind this mammal's decline in the wild, but they were also affected by continuous droughts and loss of food because of excessive livestock grazing. Luckily there is a significant number of these mammals in captivity, and there are also plenty on ranches in Texas. In January 2017, 14 of these creatures were released into a game reserve in Chad, and since then one calf has already been produced. This is the first wild birth since they were declared extinct in the wild, and hopefully this oryx and its rather threatening horns will be found in much larger numbers in the wild in the future. But for our next species we'll be heading over to Panama, as we have the Panamanian golden frog. Now these frogs were once found in the streams along the mountainous slopes of the cloud forests in western Panama, but unfortunately they cannot be found here today. They are currently listed as critically endangered but possibly extinct in the wild, as it was last seen in the wild in 2006. Although this frog is rather striking, it may not look very special to most people. This certainly isn't the case in Panama, as it's not only their national animal, but it also represents good fortune. For many years they were captured and taken into hotels and restaurants in order to both promote tourism and to give people good luck. In the wild this frog was primarily an insectivore, and they preyed mostly on insects and small invertebrates. This diet may not seem very interesting at first, but it does give them special powers. Like many of the other poison frogs in their surrounding area, they absorb the toxins from their food and then become toxic themselves. The Panamanian golden frog is thought to be very toxic, containing a variety of toxins including tetrodotoxin. This toxin keeps them safe from most predators, and is known to be able to kill mice within 20 to 30 minutes of contact. This species was a very small frog, reaching a size of around 4 to 6 centimeters. Their size and their coloration made them one of the most interesting frogs in Panama, but they suffered the same fate of many other amphibians in their area. These frogs were affected by habitat loss and pollution, but the biggest reason behind their declines were possibly due to a fungal infection. This infection is caused by an invasive fungal pathogen and has led to massive decreases in amphibians across the area. Luckily today there is a healthy population in captivity, and there is a healthy breeding population in San Diego Zoo today, and hopefully with more breeding projects like the one in San Diego Zoo, the people of Panama will get to see their national animal in the wild once again. But for our next species we'll be heading over to Guam, as we have the Guam Kingfisher. Now kingfishers are a very diverse and interesting group of birds, usually coming in many different colours. These birds usually have long bills compared to their bodies, and these are perfect for catching fish. Many kingfisher species wait on branches near water before locating small fish and diving into the water. These birds are often very accurate and have a very high success rate when diving. The Guam Kingfisher had a slightly meatier diet than most other kingfishers, mostly feeding on insects, lizards, crabs and shrimp. They would of course target fish when possible, but as Guam has more beaches than freshwater rivers, they were adapted to a diet with slightly less fish. This bird is relatively small, being around the same size as a robin. This size would mean that they're perfect prey for a tree-dwelling snake, but luckily there are no snakes native to Guam. There are plenty of native geckos and skinks on Guam, but these creatures only provided food food for these kingfishers. Because of this abundance of food and lack of predators, this kingfisher was very successful in Guam. Unfortunately, this all changed in the late 1940s when a new invasive predator was introduced. Famously, the brown tree snake is one of the worst invasive species in the world and has caused many extinctions on Guam alone. They are a slightly venomous arboreal snake and are very efficient bird hunters. It's thought that they made their way to the islands as stowaways on military vessels, and it didn't take them long to completely take over. In some cases, they were so abundant that they even started entering people's homes, and by then it was all too late for this kingfisher. As of 2021, there are thought to be around 135 individuals in captivity, with some of these individuals living in a zoo in Missouri. This zoo is responsible for some of the captive breeding, and some of the chicks hatched have been sent back over to Guam. So hopefully with more captive breeding programs like this, we'll get to see these birds back in the wild in the future. But for our next species, we'll be heading over to China, as we have Père David's deer. This deer was once native to the river valleys in China, where it mainly grazed on grasses and aquatic plants. This deer was very well adapted to these aquatic environments, and even proved to be a great swimmer. Now this deer doesn't look like your conventional deer. Its antlers almost look like they're on backwards, and they also have a horse-like long face and a donkey-like tail. Although these deer are still relatively large, reaching a size of around 1.2 meters at the shoulder, they were only attacked by the largest of predators in the wild, including tigers and leopards. These predators have mostly disappeared in the wild today, and so has this deer. These deer were hunted to near extinction in China, and in the late 19th century, the world's only herd belonged to the Emperor of China. But strangely, in the year 1900, during the Boxer Rebellion, this emperor's gardens were occupied by the troops of the German Empire. The remaining deer in this herd was shot and eaten by the soldiers, leaving less than 100 left alive. Luckily, some Europeans took specimens back to zoos in France and Germany, and some of these individuals bred in captivity. Later on in the early 20th century, the 11th Duke of Bedford acquired some of these deer and built up a large herd on his estate at Woburn Abbey. This is the same location where Wales catfish were first introduced into the UK, and of course is also the place where this deer has made its comeback. Later on in the 1980s, the 14th Duke of Bedford donated several dozen deer to the Chinese government, and so far a small population has been reintroduced back into the wild. And hopefully this reintroduction is just a start, and they can populate the river valleys of China once again. But for our final species, we'll be heading over to the west coast of Mexico, as we have the Socorro Dove. Now, as you can probably guess from this bird's name, it was endemic to Socorro Island, but it was last sighted here in 1972. In the wild, this bird was a forest-dwelling species, and was predominantly a ground dweller. They would look for food amongst the vegetation, which mostly came in the form of seeds, fruits, and insects. The cinnamon coloration of this bird helped it blend in with its natural habitat, and meant that it was harder for predators to spot them. In the wild, they had no native mammalian predators, but did face threats from red-tailed hawks and great frigate birds. They were mostly able to avoid these predators by staying in their forest homes, but unfortunately the islands in which they were found on changed dramatically. As the human population increased on the island, so did the number of livestock and pets. It's thought that the high levels of understory grazing by sheep could have limited their population, and of course they were often predated on by feral cats. Now there are only thought to be around 100 held in zoos around the world, including 25 birds in the UK. Some of them are in my local Bristol Zoo, and some of them are in London. In 2006, when one of these birds was successfully bred in London Zoo, it was given the nickname Arnie after Arnold Schwarzenegger, mostly due down to his famous line, "I'll be back." Hopefully, just like Arnold, they'll be back in the future, and this unique island bird will have a home once again. If you know of any other creatures that can make it on this list, then let me know down in the comments below. But thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed. If you liked it, please leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like these. But until next time, goodbye.